The crop yield of agriculture products is greatly affected by the environmental conditions they are grown in. So in order to get the most stable yields possible, we need seeds from varieties that are the most adapted to the climate and soil of the region. Selection of the best varieties from the crops and their multiplication is what we mean by seed production techniques. There are two types of varieties, open pollinated and F1 hybrid, and they both have different attributes in seed production methods. Open pollinated means varieties maintained through natural crossing in isolated situations, and F1 hybrid means varieties bred through the artificial crossing of two different parents. F1 hybrids have a number of merits. F1 hybrids have heterosis or hybrid vigor, so they grow strongly and give high yields. Growth and the final product are both uniform, and they are much more disease resistant compared with open pollinated varieties. And since F1 seeds can't be produced from the F1 plant, and the seeds can only be produced through the combination of special parents, they can be sold for better prices than open pollinated seeds. This video will show you how seed production is done for the F1 hybrids of tomatoes and cucumbers. The tomato F1 hybrid example we will look at has the Asian tomato with the green hypocotyl as the female parent and an American tomato with the purple hypocotyl as the male parent, so we can see whether the seed is an F1 or not during the miscross test later when it's a seedling. This is because the hypocotyl is purple like the male parent. The female parent has small fruit, is resistant to TMV and bacterial wilt, and grows well in heat. The male parent, on the other hand, has large fruit and is resistant to fusarium wilt and gray leaf spot. So the F1 we get from these parents has medium-sized fruit, does well in heat, and has a whole range of resistances like to bacterial wilt, TMV, fusarium wilt, and gray leaf spot. And the cucumber F1 cross uses a female parent that is a lateral branching type and tastes good, and the male parent, another lateral branching type, stands up to dryness extremely well. So the F1 we get from these parents both tastes good and is highly tolerant to dryness. The steps to take until seed production are sowing, raising seedlings, setting and training, cross-pollination, harvest, squeezing of pulp and seed processing, miscross test. Now we will look at the first half of the process of seed production with a look at sowing, raising seedlings, setting out in planting beds, and training the plants. First, let's start with sowing. The soil used for sowing the seeds is rich in humus. We should smooth the soil surface and water it before planting. For the cucumbers, we sow both the male and female parents at the same time. The seeds are sown in the same direction, about 1.5 to 2 centimeters apart, with about 8 to 10 centimeters between each row. When you finish planting the seeds, cover them with soil and water them. Cover them with newspaper to prevent the soil from drying out. For tomatoes, we start with the male parent seeds and only do the female parent after a week to 10 days have passed. Tomatoes are sown about 1 centimeter apart with about 6 centimeters between rows. Just like cucumbers, when you finish planting them, cover them with soil and water them well. Now we will talk about temporary transplanting. Tomatoes are ready for transplanting when the seedlings have grown and have about 2 to 3 true leaves. Transplant healthy seedlings into 9 centimeter pots. When there are about 4 to 5 true leaves, they are transplanted into 12 centimeter pots. There should be about 2,500 total seedlings per 10 acres of land, with about a 5 to 2 split between female and male parents. On the other hand, cucumbers are transplanted into 12 centimeter pots when seedlings get their first true leaf. You should prepare about 1,700 seedlings per 10 acres with about a 4 to 1 split between female and male parents. Now we shall talk about setting out the plants. When tomatoes have about 6 to 7 true leaves, and it is some 4 to 5 days before their flower and cluster open, they are ready for setting out. We set out the male seedlings first, then the female ones. Check that the stems of the males are purple and those of the females are green. For cucumbers, because the large seedlings do not take root well, we set them out when they have about 3.5 or 4 true leaves. The fertilizer we use for tomatoes and cucumbers is given out as the table below shows. We use more nitrogen fertilizer for the cucumbers compared to the tomatoes. The base soil fertilizer is compost, superphosphate, and compound fertilizer. Half of that is spread over all layers. The other half is applied through the planting furrows. For tomatoes, build up a ridge about 1 meter in width and plant the females every 60 centimeters and the males every 45. For cucumbers, however, the width should be 180 with 2 rows planted about 50 centimeters apart. You should leave about 1 meter for an access path. We use the insecticide and fungicide shown on the table to control insects and diseases. Tomatoes and cucumbers should both be planted shallowly so that the cotyledons are showing above the earth and the stems are not buried in the ground. If they're in too deep, it can cause diseases. And after we've finished planting them out, we should water them generously. After setting the plants out, we need to lay out straw around them and along the paths to prevent weeds from growing. At the same time, we put in stakes and bind the plants to them with hemp twine so that the stems do not fall down. That wraps up our explanation of setting out. After setting out the tomatoes, remove the side shoots that have grown to prevent stems and leaves from excess foliage. The female plants should be trained 3 stems. First, leave a strong shoot beneath the first flower cluster as in the diagram. Leave a strong shoot under the first flower cluster of the second main stem to make them 3. For the female cucumbers, first remove all lateral branches below the 7th node. Since it's a lateral branching type, leave the lateral branches that develop from the 8th node and leave 1 leaf above the node where the female flower is developing on the lateral branch, pinching off the growing tip early. Now we will explain about crossing tomatoes. Tomatoes are crossed when flower clusters have developed from the 7th or 8th node and there are flower buds forming. In crossing tomatoes, one process involves emasculation, removing the anthers from the flower buds and female parent. This is a very delicate job, but if it isn't done properly, then we won't be able to get the seeds that we are looking for, so we need to be careful. First, before emasculation, we need to remove the open flowers and all the flower buds that are starting to develop pollen or that are small and poor in quality. Emasculation is done choosing flower buds that have just started to open at the tip and that have anthers that are tinged with a yellow shade. Use tweezers in emasculating. First, gently open the flower bud with the tweezers and pull out the anthers from the base, being careful not to leave any behind. The pistil is surrounded by the anthers and it consists of the stigma, the style, and ovary, so you need to be careful when removing the anther so as not to damage them. Also, leaving any of the anthers behind during emasculation can cause a miscross. Next, we will look at collecting pollen from the male parents. The vibrator we use to collect pollen is made by sticking an ink cartridge from a ballpoint pen into the tip of a vibrating axle of a battery-powered electric razor. We prepare a small saucer with the inside painted black so that we can tell where the pollen grains have fallen to catch the pollen in. Pollen is collected from fully open flowers that have started to open between 10 a.m. and noon. Touch the vibrator to the peduncle of the flower and knock off the pollen. If the weather is not hot enough, then you might not be able to get enough pollen. In that case, you can use pollen left over from the day before. Pollen is stored in the fridge along the desiccant agents. Pollen is generally good for about 3 days of storage. When we have collected enough pollen, we start pollination. Look for emasculated flowers on the female parent where the petals are sufficiently curled and the tips of the stigma are sticky. Pollinate the flower by dusting on enough pollen from the saucer onto the stigma. To mark a flower that you have pollinated, remove 2 to 3 sepals with tweezers. This should be carried out aiming for a fruit setting goal of 3 to 4 fruit clusters per stem with a total fruit setting of about 30 to 35 fruits per plant. When you have finished pollination, then you should remove the flower buds and flowers newly developed. Depending on the climate, tomatoes are generally able to harvest some 40 to 50 days after pollination. They should be harvested when they are fully ripe. Orange tomatoes are not yet fully ripe, so we don't harvest them. You need to check to make sure that you are only harvesting where you removed sepals earlier as a sign of pollination. Extract the seeds from the tomatoes you harvested. Prepare a clean knife, cutting board, and plastic container. If you use a metal container to put the fruit pulp in, it will oxidize the pulp and make the seeds change color, so it's best to avoid metal ones. Cut the tomato horizontally in 2 with the knife. It's a good idea to cut several fruits at the same time. Squeeze the pulp with the seeds in it into the plastic container. Make sure you squeeze all the seeds out so that none are left. If there are any still inside, scrape them out with your fingertip. In order to make it easy to get just the seeds out of the pulp in the plastic container, we leave it for about a day and a half at a room temperature of 25 degrees to ferment it. After leaving it for a day and a half, the fermenting is complete when the gelatin substance surrounding the seeds separates. This is what it looks like just after it has been squeezed out. This is what it looks like after fermenting. You can see how the gelatin substance has separated. Extract only the seeds from the pulp. First, use a fine mesh sieve to scoop out the fermented pulp and drain out the liquid. Then use your hands to press down from above to remove the gelatin substance from around the seeds. After washing in water, transfer it into a plastic container, add water, and rinse off. Make sure that the seeds at the bottom are not washed away as well at this time. Adding water is so you can wash away the impurities and blackened seeds, and so should be repeated as many times as needed. When only the good seeds are left, that means you've finished. Now drain the seeds you have extracted. It's better to put the seeds in a cloth bag and use a dehydrator of a washing machine to remove the water. Spread the drained seeds out on a newspaper and put out to dry in the sun for about 4 hours. After that, they should have 3 to 4 days further of drying in the shade. When the seeds are dry, remove any foreign substances on them and store them in a clean bag. If you can't store them at cool temperatures, then you should store them in a place that is dry and insect-free. You should write the date of seed production, F1 name, and producer on the bag. For long-term storage, put the seeds in a container with some silica gel and store at low temperatures. It's important to take a sample of the crossed seeds and grow it to make sure it is in fact an F1. As we said earlier, verification for this tomato cross can be done with miscross test. Sow about 100 of the seeds you have gathered and observe how they germinate. The seedlings of the seeds you get from the crossing should show genetic dominance of the attributes of the male parent. If the hypocotyl of this F1 is purple, it means that crossing has worked properly. Green means a mistake in crossing. Under international standards, a 2% miscross rate is considered sufficient. So in other words, from 100 seeds, if there are only about 2 with green hypocotyls, then we can call the cross a success. Other methods we use to decide are the plant type of F1, the shape of its leaves and color, and so on in comparison with the female parent. Unlike tomatoes, cucumbers are monoecious, having the male and female flowers separate. This makes them easier to cross than tomatoes. In crossing cucumbers, we first remove all different varieties completely before crossing, and we should also remove all female flowers that have already bloomed. Pollination is done by choosing 10 female flowers on the lateral branch above the 8th node on female parent. Also, we can use male flowers on all nodes of the male parent. Now we'll explain the procedure for cross-pollination. First, the day before you intend to cross them, fasten the female flower buds of the female parent and the male flower buds of the male parent that look like they're about to open with clips or something. A good rule of thumb is to choose those of each sort that have just started to swell slightly. We clip them so that when they open early in the morning, insects don't get in and pollinate them. In the morning on the day of pollination, pinch off the male flowers you fasten with the clips on male parent. Next, take off the clips from the female flowers on female parent and open up the petals. deposit the pollen from the male flower anthers all around the stigma. After pollinating them, close up the female flowers with clips so they cannot open. After that, mark the pollinated female flower with a clip at the peduncle. That way, you can tell at a glance even if they grow. You'll need to use about 1 male flower for every female flower. You should only pick a few male flowers at a time. Also, they should be placed down by the roots or somewhere in the shade. Make sure you work quickly so that insects do not come and pollinate the flowers while you're pollinating them. Like tomatoes, the pollinating work should be completed in the morning. And don't forget to remove the red tags you used to mark the areas where you cross them. When you finish pollinating the plants, remove all female flowers you didn't pollinate and lateral branch from the nodes above where you cross them. When the cucumber fruit gets large, it will touch the ground and easily shed fruits, so tie peduncle up with hemp twine to prevent it from shedding fruits. Cucumbers can be harvested in about 45 days after pollination or between 35 and 40 in summer. Harvest the cucumbers when they are fully ripe. The fruit color of the female parent goes yellow as a sign of ripeness. The one on the right is still a bit early, isn't it? After harvesting, line them up with the lower swollen part on top. This is so the bottom of the fruit does not go rotten. The cucumbers should be left for about 7 to 10 days to further ripen before we extract the seeds. Now we need to extract the seeds from the fully ripened cucumbers. Like with the tomatoes, prepare a clean knife, cutting board, and plastic container. Metal will make the seeds go black, so should be avoided. Split the cucumber in 2 lengthways and scoop out the pulp in the middle where the seeds are with your fingers into the plastic container. After getting them all out, we leave the seeds to ferment for a day at a room temperature of about 25 degrees so we can remove the gelatin substance around the seeds. These ones have been fermented. You can see here how the gelatin substance has separated from the seeds. We remove the pulp and gelatin substance just like for the tomatoes. After getting them clean, we put them in a cloth bag and remove the water in a dehydrator of a washing machine. And then we should dry them for half a day under the sun. After shade drying for 3 or 4 days like tomatoes, for long-term storage, we should store the seeds at low temperatures in cases with desiccant agents. How did the participants feel about seed production techniques?
Those hybrids are very expensive, so as long as I got knowledge how to produce hybrid seed from our local varieties, we can produce our own lines and then we can produce hybrid seed because hybrid seed has got advantage because it is high yielder, uniform in growth, disease resistant when as compared to the open pollinated varieties.
F1 seeds is very expensive in my country because most of it is imported. So I could probably use the knowledge and the little skills I've learned in this training course in producing probably our own lines and make them readily available to farmers at a very low cost.
seeds are the life of crops. By using these F1 seeds, you have reduced damage of diseases, stable harvests, and can produce good quality vegetables, which in the end all add up to improving farm incomes. For this reason, we would like you to thoroughly master these seed production techniques.